I thought the worst mistake I could ever make was falling for a childhood friend while my wife was thousands of miles away. But that wasn't the real disaster. What came after, her tears, her forgiveness, and the pregnancy that followed, dragged us into something darker than infidelity. My wife didn't just come home with our child growing inside her. She came back with a mind unraveling, a faith that turned into torment, and a protest sign that could get her killed. When people ask about my marriage, I never know where to begin. Do I start with the part where I stayed behind to raise our two little boys while my wife flew across oceans to save strangers? Or do I start with the night I realized I wasn't as loyal as I told myself I was, when coffee with an old friend turned into something I couldn't explain away as innocent? On the surface, we were the family people pointed to with admiration, a dedicated aid worker wife, a husband who sacrificed his career to raise the kids, two boys who laughed too loud for bedtime. But behind that image was a fracture we kept patching with good intentions. My wife was never cruel, never neglectful by choice. But she was absent in ways that broke me. Even when she was home, her mind was chained to her job. She wasn't scrolling TikTok or gossiping with friends. She was haunted by gunfire she'd witnessed, starving children she couldn't save, and the constant whisper in her head that she wasn't doing enough. And me? I was supposed to be grateful she still loved me through all of that. I wasn't. When I ran into my childhood friend again, it felt like oxygen after years underwater. She laughed at my jokes, admired the way I took care of my sons, and didn't look past me like I was just the guy holding the fort while my wife fought her invisible wars. I told myself it was harmless. My wife even joked, "Should I be jealous?" And I swore she didn't have to be. But fantasies creep in quietly. A longer hug than necessary. A conversation that veered from parenting into loneliness. A moment where she said our kids felt like brothers, and I let myself imagine a different life. One where I wasn't waiting for my wife's next return ticket. That fantasy ended the day my friend said it out loud. "You should leave your wife for me." In that second, the illusion shattered. I saw what I had done, not just to my wife, but to myself. I wasn't cheating with my body, but my heart had already crossed lines I swore I never would. I confessed. My wife forgave. For a moment, I thought that was the bottom. But it was only the beginning. Because forgiveness wasn't the end of our story. It was the entry point into a spiral I never expected. A pregnancy, a diagnosis, protests in the street, neighbors turning their backs, and the sinking realization that maybe the real betrayal wasn't what I did to my wife. Maybe it was what the world was doing to her. Little did I know, everything was about to change. It was supposed to be harmless. That's what I kept telling myself as I left the kids with my friend and walked down the street to meet her. We'd been meeting like this for months. Coffee at the park, kids chasing each other across the grass while we swapped stories about old neighborhoods and the people we used to know. I told myself it was nostalgia, nothing more. A way to reconnect with the past without losing control of the present. But this time was different. She asked if we could meet alone. No kids, no playground noise to drown out what she wanted to say. I should have felt the weight in her voice when she said, "I need to talk to you, seriously." Instead, I told myself it was about her ex, or maybe her job. Something safe. Something that didn't involve me. We sat at a corner table, coffee between us, her hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around the mug. For the first few minutes, she spoke about her son, about school troubles, about how much she wished she had someone steady in her life. I nodded, sympathetic, convincing myself I was just being a good listener. Then she leaned forward. Her eyes didn't blink, didn't look away. "We both know what this is," she said. "You feel it too, don't you?" My heart slammed against my ribs. I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that eases tension. It cracked in the middle like a lie exposed. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She didn't smile. "I mean, we have feelings for each other. You don't have to pretend anymore. You deserve better. Leave your wife. Be with me." It was like every excuse I'd whispered to myself was dragged into the open and nailed to the table between us. Every hug I'd replayed in my head, every night I'd imagined an alternate life, it was suddenly undeniable. And in that moment, I realized just how far I'd fallen. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. My silence said everything. I felt my stomach twist as guilt poured over me, heavy and suffocating. I thought of my wife, thousands of miles away, smiling when I told her I'd reconnected with an old friend. Trusting me. Joking, "Should I be jealous?" never imagining that someday the answer would be yes. I should have stood up. I should have told her there was nothing between us, that I loved my wife, that this was over. Instead, I sat frozen, staring into my coffee like the answer might be written in the foam. She touched my hand gently before leaving, whispering, "Think about it." And I did. For hours. For days. For nights where my kids slept peacefully in the next room and I lay awake, imagining my wife's face when she found out. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Because that was just the beginning of my nightmare. I thought I could bury it. Just push the memory of her words down deep and move on like nothing happened. After all, I hadn't done anything. No kisses, no nights in her bed, no secret texts that could be screenshotted and passed around. Just a conversation, one I could pretend never happened. But silence is its own kind of confession. Every time my wife's name lit up my phone, I felt my throat tighten. Her video calls were the worst. She'd be sitting on a cot in some dimly lit base overseas, smiling through exhaustion, asking me how the boys were, if they were eating well, if I was holding up okay. I answered like I always did, with half-truths wrapped in reassurances. "They're fine. I'm fine. We miss you." I didn't tell her that my heart sank when she smiled, because I kept hearing another voice. "You should leave your wife for me." The guilt started leaking into everything. When my kids hugged me, I felt like a fraud. When my friend, my so-called confidant, texted me a casual meme or photo of her son, I felt my pulse race. I deleted her messages, then checked my phone again 10 minutes later as if erasing evidence would erase temptation. One night, after I put the boys to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards settling. I stared at the family photo on the wall, me, my wife, and the kids, taken during one of her short visits home. She had her arm around me, smiling like she still believed in us. And all I could think was, if she knew the truth, that smile would be gone forever. That was the first time I considered telling her. Not because I was brave, but because the weight was unbearable. It pressed down on me until even mundane tasks felt like sins. Folding laundry, reading bedtime stories, buying groceries. Each one whispered, "You're lying. You're betraying her trust." I tried to talk myself out of it. Everyone has intrusive thoughts. It wasn't physical. You didn't actually cheat. But the arguments collapsed under their own weakness. I wanted to believe them, but the truth gnawed at me. I had already betrayed her, emotionally, mentally, maybe even spiritually. The breaking point came one morning when my older son asked why Mommy didn't live with us all the time. I gave him the same rehearsed line. "She helps people far away who need her." But the words caught in my throat. Because the real answer was darker. Mommy trusted Daddy to keep the family together, and Daddy was failing. I sat in silence long after my son ran off to play. My chest felt hollow. I realized then that hiding would destroy me faster than confessing ever could. I had to tell her. The only question was how. Face-to-face? A phone call? An email that would detonate her trust in one cold paragraph? No matter what, someone's world was about to break. And I wasn't ready for what I was about to discover. I booked the ticket with trembling hands. It felt reckless, almost cruel, to spend what little we had on a flight just to break her heart in person. But the thought of her stepping off that plane in October, smiling and rushing into my arms, only for me to ruin it with words she could never unhear, that felt worse. So I went to her instead. The base where she worked was dusty, loud with unfamiliar accents, the air thick with heat and diesel fumes. She spotted me before I saw her. Her face lit up like the sunrise, and for a fleeting second, I almost turned around and fled. But she was already running toward me, throwing her arms around me, holding me like I was the one safe place she had left in the world. And all I could think was, "You're about to destroy this." She didn't want to hear bad news right away. Instead, she took me by the hand and led me down a path, out past the bustle, to a small waterfall tucked behind rocks. "This is my spot," she said, eyes soft. "Whenever things get heavy, I come here and think of you. I wanted you to see it with me." I almost broke right there. My chest burned with the weight of my secret. The spray of the water cooled my skin but did nothing to stop the fire in my gut. When she finally turned to me and said, "Okay, tell me," I couldn't look her in the eye. I told her everything. The words scraped out of me like glass, raw and jagged. Coffee with a childhood friend. The innocent beginnings. The hugs that lingered too long. The fantasies I pretended were harmless until they weren't. And finally, the moment she asked me to leave my wife. Her expression barely changed at first. She nodded, lips pressed into a line, as if she was trying to be the calm one, the rational one. But her eyes told the truth. They flickered with hurt, glassy and distant. I wanted her to scream. I wanted her to slap me, to unleash the rage I deserved. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you for being honest." That cut deeper than any insult could. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, just slightly, enough to make the space between us colder. She asked questions in a voice that trembled. Did you love her? Did you wish she was me? Did you want to leave? I answered as best I could. No, I never stopped loving you. I didn't want her. I broke off, ashamed of how weak my explanation sounded. The silence that followed was unbearable. The waterfall roared, drowning my thoughts, but I could still hear the cracking of something fragile between us. That night, she let me stay in her quarters. She lay next to me, her back turned, her breathing uneven. I stared at the ceiling, wishing for punishment, for release, for anything but this heavy quiet. I thought confession would be the end, that telling her would lift the weight. Instead, it only shifted the burden. Because now the guilt wasn't just mine, it was written across her face, and I wasn't ready for what would come next. I thought the hardest part was over. I confessed. She knew. She forgave me, or at least said she did. I told myself the wound would close, scar over, and life would go back to what it was before. But wounds don't heal when the ground beneath you is still breaking apart. Over the next few days at the base, I stayed close to her. I followed her into the chaos of her work, helping where I could, lifting supplies, distracting the kids who swarmed her, carrying boxes in the relentless heat. She smiled at me, even touched my arm now and then, but there was a distance I couldn't cross. One night, she asked me if I really still wanted to be with her, not as an accusation, but as a plea. Her voice was soft, but I heard the cracks in it. "You know I'm never going to quit this job," she said. "It's who I am. And if that means I'm not enough for you, I need to know now." I told her I wanted her, I always had, but I couldn't stop myself from saying what I'd been holding back for years, that even when she was home, her mind wasn't. That sometimes I felt like she loved me only because I was there, and anyone else who stood beside her could have been enough. She cried at that. Quiet, restrained tears. Then she listed every specific thing she loved about me. The way I carried our boys on my shoulders, the way I sang off-key at bedtime, the way I fixed small things around the house without ever complaining. Her voice cracked as she said them, but each word felt like a desperate tether, tying me back to her. For the first time, I saw how afraid she was. Not of me leaving her for another woman, but of me leaving it all. She confessed she lived in constant fear that I would wake up one day and realize I didn't want this life anymore. And that's when she told me what she hadn't told anyone else. She admitted that sometimes she felt like she wasn't making choices at all, that her thoughts weren't her own, that she was haunted by constant reminders of suffering, like whispers she couldn't silence. She thought it was God speaking to her, commanding her never to stop. That was why she couldn't let herself be present with us at home, because every moment of peace felt stolen from people who had none. It wasn't just distance. It was obsession. Her therapist had hinted it might be OCD, but she'd hidden the worst of it, terrified they'd pull her from the field, terrified that without the work, she'd be nothing. Listening to her, I realized my so-called confession was only one thread in a tangled web of pain neither of us had wanted to face. The emotional affair was a wound, but her mind, her faith, her relentless self-punishment, those were the fractures that threatened to shatter everything. I thought I was the one breaking us, but the truth was bigger, darker. This went so much deeper than I ever imagined. When I got back home with the boys, I thought I'd feel lighter. I had told her the truth. She forgave me. We cried together. We promised to keep working on us. That should have been the clean slate I'd been waiting for. But the clean slate never came. Instead, every morning began with the same quiet panic. I'd wake up before the kids, sit at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee, and stare at my phone. Should I call her? Should I text her? Should I check the news to see if something happened in whatever country she was working in now? And underneath all of that, the question that made my stomach twist. How do I keep this marriage alive when she's halfway across the world and halfway gone inside her own head? Part of me wanted to plan the impossible. Maybe I could convince her to quit. Maybe if I found a stable job, she'd come home. I pictured us in some small rented house, her cooking dinner while I fixed a broken shelf, the boys playing in the yard. But I knew it was a fantasy. She had told me, again and again, she was never going to quit. Her work wasn't a job. It was a calling. So if I couldn't change her, I had to change myself. That's what I told myself as I juggled the kids, the bills, the construction gigs that barely paid enough to keep the lights on. I tried to be both father and mother. Tried to be the anchor while she was away, so when she came back she wouldn't see what I really was. A man fraying at the edges, terrified of losing everything. At night, after the kids were asleep, the doubts would creep in. I'd replay her words from the waterfall. I'm never going to quit. It's who I am. Was I strong enough to live with that? Or was I just fooling myself? Waiting for the day she woke up and realized I wasn't enough either? I thought about the friend I had cut off, about how easy it had been to feel seen by someone else. And I hated myself for it. Because the truth was, I didn't just want to be seen. I wanted to be chosen. And every time my wife left again, it felt like she was choosing the world over us. Some nights, I would lie awake with both boys curled against me, their small breaths rising and falling in rhythm. I'd promise myself out loud, in whispers they couldn't hear, I won't fail you. I'll hold this family together, even if it kills me. But the more I promised, the more hollow it sounded. Because deep down, I knew something was coming. Something bigger than my confession, bigger than the distance, bigger even than the resentment I carried. And when it hit, no amount of promises would be enough. I spent sleepless nights planning. Finally, I thought I knew what I had to do. The plan was simple, at least on paper. Fly out again, face her directly, and show her I was committed. I told myself if I stood by her side in her world, even just for a short time, she'd see I wasn't her enemy. She'd believe me when I said I wasn't leaving. Maybe she'd even start to imagine a life where she could come home for good. So I scraped the money together, begged favors from friends to watch the boys, and boarded another flight. This time, I wasn't coming to confess. I was coming to prove something. She greeted me with the same warmth as before, but I noticed the exhaustion clinging to her. She was thinner, her eyes shadowed. When I asked how she'd been, she brushed it off with a half smile. It's just the work. But I felt the lie underneath. I spent the week shadowing her, helping where I could. The locals teased her about me, calling me her bodyguard. And for the first time in months, I saw her laugh without restraint. That laugh gave me hope. I thought maybe this was it. Maybe I'd found the way back to us. One evening, as we sat under the stars by the same waterfall, I told her my plan. I said I wanted us to find a permanent place when she came home. I'd pick up steadier work. She could finish her degree, maybe even pivot her career to something closer to home. We could finally be a family in one place, I said. She listened quietly, her fingers tracing patterns in the dirt. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. I can't promise that. You know I can't. The words stung, but I pushed back. Then at least promise me you'll keep working on being present when you are home. Promise me you'll try. She nodded. She even leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder. In that moment, I felt relief flood my chest. I thought we had turned a corner. I thought the nightmare was finally loosening its grip. For a few weeks after, it almost seemed true. When she came home that October, she was softer with the boys, more attentive with me. We had dinners together, took walks as a family, even laughed about small things. For the first time in years, I let myself breathe. But peace has a cruel way of disguising itself. Because just as I began to believe we were steady again, she dropped the news. She was pregnant. And almost immediately after, the other revelation followed. The therapist suspected she had obsessive-compulsive disorder. Not the neat freak kind people joke about, but a darker form, where every terrible thing in the world felt like her responsibility. It hit me like a second confession, one I hadn't seen coming. I thought my truth had nearly broken us. But her truth was far heavier. I thought it was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. For a while, I convinced myself her pregnancy would ground her, that the baby growing inside her would anchor her back to us, force her to slow down, to put family first. And at first, it seemed like that might happen. She kept her prenatal appointments. She smiled when the boys kissed her belly. There were even mornings when she looked happy. But then the news cycle turned darker. Trump took office, and with him came funding cuts for aid programs. The organization she worked for was suddenly talking layoffs, restructuring, whole projects vanishing overnight. My wife didn't take it like a professional setback. She took it like a death sentence. Her phone never left her hand. Texts from coworkers flooded in, updates from the ground, rumors of children starving without resources, of villages abandoned. She barely slept, barely ate. And then one morning, without a word to me, she left the house with a hand-painted sign and walked along the main road to protest. I only found out because my best friend texted me. "I'm with her. Don't panic." At first, I was relieved she wasn't in bed curled up and shaking like she had been the day before. But that relief lasted only seconds. Because the image of my pregnant wife standing by a highway, shouting at cars in a town where people wear Trump hats like uniforms and carry guns like wallets, nearly made me sick. I begged her not to go again. She nodded, promised she'd be careful. Then the next day, she went anyway. And the day after that. Soon it wasn't occasional, it was constant. She spent more hours on that road than she did at home. When I asked her why she wouldn't stop, she snapped. "Why aren't you out there? Why isn't everyone? What kind of people can sit at home when genocide is happening?" I didn't have an answer. The neighbors noticed too. Some just avoided me. Others made comments, their voices sticky with judgment. "So, I saw your wife the other day. The hardest blow came when one of my son's best friends was suddenly not allowed to come over anymore. His mom looked me in the eye and said, 'He can come here, but not to your house.' No explanation needed. We both knew why, and it wasn't just social whispers. Work dried up. People who used to call me for odd jobs stopped. When I waved at neighbors, they barely waved back. I felt the walls closing in, the circle tightening. We weren't just outsiders anymore. We were being pushed out, quietly, methodically. At night, I'd hold my wife's hand and beg her to come back to therapy, to take her meds, to think of the boys. She'd pull away and whisper, "Happiness isn't for me. I'm not meant to be happy. I'm meant to fight." That was when it hit me. This wasn't about politics, or even just about Palestine. This was her illness feeding on the world's pain, convincing her that sacrifice was the only way she deserved to exist. And I realized I wasn't just fighting to save our marriage anymore. I was fighting to keep her alive. What happened next made me question everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and survival. It happened on a Thursday, a day that should have been ordinary. The boys were at preschool, the sky heavy with summer heat, and I was fixing a loose railing on the porch when my phone buzzed. It was my best friend again, the same friend who always seemed to end up shadowing my wife when I couldn't. "She's on the road again. People are stopping. It's getting heated." My stomach dropped. I jumped into the car, hands shaking on the wheel, heart hammering as I sped down the familiar stretch of highway. And there she was, my pregnant wife, belly unmistakable now, standing in the gravel shoulder with a cardboard sign clutched to her chest. Cars roared past, some honking in support, others slowing just long enough for passengers to lean out the window and scream. I pulled over just as a truck braked hard in front of her, its grille towering over her like a predator. The driver leaned out, veins bulging, a Trump sticker glaring from his bumper. "Go back where you came from," he bellowed. My wife didn't flinch. She screamed back louder, her voice hoarse, her sign shaking in her hands. I sprinted toward her, my legs numb, ready to throw myself between her and the truck if I had to. My best friend was already there, tugging at her arm, begging her to step back. But my wife planted her feet like a soldier in a trench. She wasn't just protesting. She was daring the world to crush her. It took everything in me to get her away, to coax her into my car while she trembled with rage, still shouting at shadows. The ride home was silent except for her breathing, fast, shallow, ragged. I glanced at her profile, her eyes wild, her lips whispering words I couldn't catch. That night, I broke. I sat across from her in the darkened living room while the boys slept upstairs. "You're going to get yourself killed," I whispered, voice raw. "And then what? What happens to me? To the kids? To the baby you're carrying?" She stared at me with a calm I didn't recognize. "Then you'll know I did everything I could. Isn't that better than doing nothing?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I wept. For her. For our children. For the life we were supposed to have. I felt powerless, a spectator to my own marriage collapsing under forces I couldn't touch. Her illness, her guilt, the world's cruelty. And for the first time, I wondered if love was enough. Because it didn't matter how much I loved her, how many promises I made, how fiercely I wanted to hold her together. If she didn't want to stay alive for us, what chance did I have? I sat there until the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, realizing something that hollowed me out completely. If I didn't find a way to stop this, I wasn't just going to lose my wife. I was going to lose everything. The breaking point came 1 week later. I had just picked up the boys from preschool when my phone rang again, my best friend's number flashing across the screen. Her voice was frantic. She's out there again. Alone this time. You need to come now. I didn't think. I drove. The boys sat in the back, wide-eyed, sensing something was wrong. By the time I reached the stretch of highway, my heart was in my throat. There she was, not on the shoulder this time, but standing in the middle of the turning lane, her sign raised above her head, screaming at cars as they swerved to avoid her. Horns blared. Tires screeched. A pickup rolled down its window, a man shouting slurs I won't repeat. One driver threw a bottle that smashed at her feet, and she didn't move. I slammed the car into park, left the boys inside, and sprinted into traffic. I grabbed her arm, yanking her back just as another car swerved too close. The rush of air felt like death brushing past us. What the hell are you doing? I screamed, my voice breaking. She twisted in my grip, eyes blazing with something between fury and ecstasy. I have to. Don't you see? Nobody else will. If I don't stand here, then I'm no better than them. I shook her, desperate, terrified. You're pregnant. You're their mother. You're my wife. You think dying in the street is noble? It's not. It's leaving us behind. It's abandoning us. For a moment, the words hung between us. Her chest rose and fell, breath ragged, eyes darting between mine. I could see the war inside her, the obsession telling her to burn herself for the world, and the woman I married, the one who once laughed at bad jokes and dreamed of a home filled with love. The boys were crying in the car now, their little fists pounding the glass, calling for us. And maybe that's what broke through. She looked past me, saw their faces pressed against the window, their tears streaking down. Her lips trembled. I don't know how to stop, she whispered. It feels like if I stop, everything will fall apart. I pulled her close, holding her as tight as I could without crushing her. My own tears blurred the world. Then let it fall. Let it all fall. Just don't let it take you with it. We need you more than the world does. Please, choose us. She collapsed into me, sobbing, the sign slipping from her hands and landing in the gravel. Cars sped by, horns blaring, voices shouting. But for the first time, she didn't shout back. She just clung to me, trembling like a child lost in a storm. It wasn't a miracle fix. I knew that. But in that moment, on that dangerous strip of road, I felt her finally hear me. And I knew this was the choice that would decide everything. In the days after that confrontation, everything felt fragile. My wife stopped protesting. Not because she was suddenly cured, not because she woke up one morning free of the voices in her head, but because she saw the fear in our boys' faces when they watched her in the road. That image stayed with her, the same way it stayed with me. She still whispered about injustice, still scrolled through the news at night until her eyes glazed over. But she didn't pick up another sign. Not after that day. We focused on the basics, doctor's appointments, therapy, routines with the kids. I drove her to her sessions, sat in waiting rooms with magazines I never really read, holding my breath every time the door opened. Sometimes she came out looking lighter, sometimes heavier. Once, she told me, it feels like peeling away skin that grew wrong. I didn't know how to respond, so I just held her hand. The pregnancy carried on. Our boys grew more protective of her, kissing her belly, announcing to strangers that they were going to be big brothers. There were nights when I almost let myself believe in a happy ending. A baby's cry, a family reunited, a wife who finally let herself rest. But even in those moments, the fear never left me. Because happiness felt like something we were borrowing, not something we owned. Neighbors never fully forgave us. Some still avoided me, others offered stiff smiles. But I could tell. We were marked. The family with the radical wife. The family not like everyone else. Work offers stayed thin. Friends who once invited us to barbecues stopped calling. Our circle shrank until it was just us, a few loyal friends, and the constant hum of judgment from outside. And yet, inside our home, something did change. My wife began to let me see her more honestly. She admitted when she was spiraling. She let me take over when she couldn't get out of bed. She even told her therapist the things she used to hide. That felt like progress, even if it was messy and uneven. One night, as we sat together after putting the kids to sleep, she asked me if I regretted staying. The question hit me like a stone to the chest. Because the truth is, part of me did. Part of me longed for an easier life, one without constant fear and heartbreak. But I looked at her, exhausted, imperfect, still carrying the weight of the world, and I realized something. Love isn't about ease. It's about endurance. I don't regret it, I told her. Not for a second. She cried then, quietly, and for once it wasn't from guilt or despair. It was from relief. Things aren't perfect. Maybe they never will be. But we're still here, together. And after everything, that feels like the closest thing to victory we'll ever get. If you've listened this far, thank you. I know this wasn't easy to hear, because it wasn't easy to live. I used to think marriages broke with one mistake, one betrayal, one choice you couldn't take back. But now I know they break in quieter ways too. Distance, silence, and the weight of battles no one else can see. I don't know if we'll make it forever. I don't know if love is enough to fight illness, judgment, and the pull of the world outside our walls. But I do know this. Every day I wake up and she's still here, choosing us, choosing to try. That's a victory I'll take. Maybe you've been in a place like this, where loyalty feels like a punishment, or where loving someone means carrying their demons too. If you have, I'd like to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. I'll be reading. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. Not for me, but for every untold story that deserves to be heard, no matter how messy or hard it is to admit.